If you're anything like me, then you will have spent December looking forward to a much-needed holiday over Christmas. A bit of a break, a bit of peace and quiet. My day job, away from the pulpit, is as a barrister. And so I spend a lot of my time reading long contracts and other very boring and complicated legal documents. And so imagine my relief when the holidays come. They give me a chance to do a different kind of reading. And one of the things that I was planning to do over what I thought would be a lovely, calm, quiet day was to settle down and read something altogether different, my favourite book. But if you're anything like me, you will also have found that when the time actually arrived, when work ended and the holiday began, there was no peace and quiet at all. It was all go, 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 with children and presents and food and visitors, every manner of things to be done. And before you know it, it's time for work again. Hooray. So no time for my favourite book on this occasion, but happily I've read it many times before, and I know it well enough to reflect about it without reading it again. It's a book called The Way of Muri. Anybody read it? Muri. M-U-R-I. It tells the story of a journey of a cat. But it does far more than that. It deals with ideas about the meaning and purpose of life. Let me explain. At the beginning of the book, Muri the cat lives in a house in Bosnia with everything he could possibly want. A doting family to serve him, large grounds to roam in, a constant supply of milk, and a nice warm blanket. Sounds good, doesn't it? But his home gets bombed in the war, and when Muri returns from a frolic in a field, and he gets back to the bombed-out house, he finds that his family has fled without him. And so, extremely cross that his servants have deserted him, Muri the cat sets out on a journey, and off he goes to find once more the comforts he was once given by the family who served him. Now, it's a simple enough tale, but woven in and amongst Muri's story, the book looks at two radically different ideas. One suggests that life is an infinite journey, that the very purpose of life is travelling, moving, developing. The other, in direct contrast, suggests that sooner or later, every arrow must reach its target and end its flight, that the purpose of life is reaching, attaining the desired goal, whatever the goal might be. And at Christmas time, both of those apparently opposite ideas, one about life as a constant journey, one about life focused on achieving a goal, seem to me to be in play. Let's just think of it for a moment. Culturally, we are programmed to think of Christmas as the end of the year. And after Christmas, we celebrate New Year's Eve, we have a great party, and then it's the new year, and we start all over again. We've got our New Year's resolutions. And on the 1st of January 2025, we turn a new leaf. 2024 is in the past. And when we think of the nativity story, we can even start to think of Christmas in that way as well. We're told of a number of journeys going on. Joseph and Mary are just two of the many people who at that time were travelling. They were heading out on a journey for the purpose of the census that was being carried out. And Joseph and Mary journeyed to Bethlehem. The wise men also set out on a long journey from a different country, following a star to find Jesus. And both of those physical journeys have a goal, an endpoint, and their destination is Bethlehem, where the baby is born in a stable. So as we progress through Advent and reach Christmas, we can be forgiven for thinking that Christmas is the conclusion to a lovely story in the same way that our society and our culture sees it as the end here. But I think it's important from a Christian perspective that we don't let ourselves fall into that same way of viewing Christmas. Because Christmas is very definitely not the end. For us, the birth of Jesus is only the beginning. But to say that only leads to further questions, doesn't it? The beginning of what? Historically, of course, it marks the beginning of Jesus' time here on earth, the necessary curtain before he was able to begin his ministry. And so for us, it's the beginning of the foundations of our faith, the start of everything that we build our beliefs on. But it also gives rise to fundamental questions about what we believe, who we believe this Jesus character was. What did he do? What did he represent? How are we to think of him? Why is his birth so significant, if it's worth bothering about at all? These are all key questions that underpin the entire Christian religion, and that all stem from the birth of a baby one Christmas 2,000 years ago. But if you go into the streets outside, nobody's concerned with those questions. They're concerned with the holiday and the presents and the new year. And there's no easy answer to any of those questions. Theologians and philosophers have debated the question of who Jesus was and what his birth means for us pretty much since Jesus died. And I'm sure you'll be pleased to know that I don't intend in this little sermon today to try and trace through 2,000 years of theological debate. That can wait for another time. But that doesn't mean we can get away with doing nothing today. We've got some work to do, because the lectionary reading from John demands us to engage with that question. It goes to the heart of it all. Who is Jesus? And it requires us to give some serious thought to that. And it's probably a question that you've wrestled with a lot yourself, and you might even have been asked about it by people outside the church, by friends, by people interested in exploring their own faith. If we believe in Jesus and we celebrate his birth at Christmas, we need to be able to explain who we think he was and why we think he was important. So fasten your seatbelts. And we've got some serious work to do right now. So stay with me. And let's start with the human side of Jesus. Historically, factually, what we know is that we have a man born around 2,000 years ago. He became a traveling preacher, going far and wide, explaining and spreading God's message to the people, all people, highborn and lowborn, men and women, rich and poor, those inside society, part of society, and those who are outcasts. He regularly spoke to and prayed to God. He carried out all sorts of miracles, healing people, feeding people. His principal message stressed the importance of love. How do we gain eternal life? He said. He was asked, love God, love your neighbor, was his answer. And he was not afraid of causing controversy. As we say nowadays, he was not afraid to speak truth to power. And that ruffled feathers among the religious and political elite of the day. And so they eventually executed him on a cross, which was a common, if particularly brutal, form of punishment in Roman times. But as Christians, we go further than this human account, and that's what we hear in today's reading from John. John here grapples in typically poetic language with what we see of God through Jesus. In verse 1 we're told, "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God." And verse 14 says, "The Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us,
We've seen his glory, the glory of the one and only Son, who came from the Father, full of grace and truth. So the Word was with God and was God. And the Word became flesh. And the Bible translations that we use that refer to the Word are translating the Greek logos. So we're being told that the logos, which has always been part of God, came to earth through the person of Jesus. It's a mind-boggling concept, isn't it? And one which probably makes absolutely no sense to those people out on the streets. I've grappled with it in a couple of different ways. First, I mentioned that I'm a lawyer. Sorry for that. And one concept that I deal with a lot as part of my job is something called agency, where someone acts on someone else's behalf. So in law, if I appoint an agent to do something for me, they're doing it on my behalf and as if they were me. So if somebody enters into a contract with you and they're acting as my agent, the contract's between me and you. The agent then falls out of the picture. They've just been standing in for me. And I find that a useful analogy here. Whoever Jesus was, he was acting with God's authority, performing miracles and reminding people of their obligations as God's children. And Jesus cast aside his own desires in favor of God's will. So he basically became the perfect agent. And so the human Jesus was there to convey a message, but the message was God's. The result is that when we listen to Jesus and that message, we're actually relating to God which Jesus was representing. And thinking of Jesus in a representative sort of way like that makes sense when we remember his place in the Trinity. Jesus is described as the Son, and so a direct representative of his Father, in the same way that an earthly king might send his son out to a foreign kingdom as an ambassador. The reference to Jesus as Son might illustrate that representative nature of Jesus and his ministry. I said there were two. The other way that I think about it is through the image of a mirror. And this is an image that was used by a monk known as Meister Eckhart. And Meister Eckhart lived in Germany about 1,000 years ago. And he said this. He said, imagine taking a mirror and putting it in the sun. The sun shines, sending out its light rays. And yet the sun stays just as bright. It doesn't diminish or get darker. It doesn't get less powerful. It's no less the sun just because it's sending out those lights. And then look at the mirror that's now in the sun. The mirror is also sending out those same light rays, reflecting the sun above it. So when you're looking at the mirror, you're looking at the sun. And yet it's still a mirror. And I find that to be a really helpful way of thinking about Jesus. If we think of Jesus as being a mirror, we see that everything that he was, everything that he did, was a reflection of God the Father. He was still Jesus, this human man born in Bethlehem to a mother called Mary. But we can also see the divine in him, something of God in him. The divinity of Jesus was his reflection of God. And that acting as a mirror shows us the parts of God we need to see and understand. It shows us as much of God as we can possibly bear. So then, how are we to understand that difficult passage from John's Gospel that we heard today? How might we think of Jesus? To my eyes, it is a passage confirming that something of the essence of God, the Logos, was shown to us here on earth through the person of Jesus all those years ago. Something of God reflected and working through Jesus. But let's not forget that human side of Jesus that we began with, because it's that human side that sets us the perfect example of how to live
an example of perfect love, care, compassion, standing up for others, focusing on what's important, casting our earthly desires aside, a perfect example of self-sacrifice. By seeing Jesus' human side, we know that we too can seek to be a mirror of God, reflecting his love here on earth and allowing God to work through us. So bringing that back to today and to our Christmas message, why was Jesus' birth important? Why do we celebrate it? What does it mean for us? The birth of this baby, Jesus, represented the beginning of the next stage in God's plan, a stage in which the very essence, the very reflection of God himself would be made clear to us in undiluted, unfiltered human form here on earth. It marked the beginning of a stage in which God would say to us, "Here, see, this is what you need to know about me. Love me, your neighbor, and come into a relationship with me." And when we think about Christmas, that is what we have to keep in mind. That's why we do it all. One more thing. I often think we forget about the wise men once they've handed over their gold, their frankincense, and their myrrh. But the passage we heard this morning from Matthew actually goes on to tell us that after they'd presented their treasures, they turned to their country. Their journey wasn't over. They came to worship, and then they went home. And we can only imagine what they might have spoken about with Mary and Joseph when they arrived and asked to see the baby, and then gave these expensive gifts and worshipped. Imagine giving birth in hospital and 3 men turning up saying, "We'd like to see your baby. We've got you a diamond ring, an Omega watch, and all sorts of things." Did Mary and Joseph tell them about the angel's visit or God's plan for the child? And we can only imagine what the wise men, when they then went back home, told their people. Was it something along the lines of the hymn of Once in Royal David's City? Did they go back and say, "There was this lowly cattle shed. The baby was laid in a manger or a bed, surrounded by farm animals. He's not rich. The gifts that we gave him are the most expensive things he's got. He's not highborn. He's not segregated, protected from the lowly. He's one of them. He's one of us." Might that be what they said? I mean, one thing I think we can be pretty sure about is they won't have just gone home and continued as if nothing happened. I mentioned at the beginning that this book of mine, The Way of Muri, refers to these 2 philosophical schools of thought. That one is life is an infinite journey, one is life is focused on reaching a goal. For Muri, the cat, his search for his family, who fled that bombed-out Bosnian home, had an end point. His goal was getting back the pleasures that he'd lost, the pleasures he'd previously enjoyed, and once he got them back, his goal was fulfilled. His journey ends. I'm sorry if I've just spoiled the ending of the book for you. The Christmas story itself is full of journeys. Mary and Joseph, the wise men, the shepherds. Even Jesus begins his journey. But for us, Christmas is not the end point. The journey doesn't stop there. Christmas is a call to action, a call to accept the unthinkable, unimaginable, unfathomable gift that was given to us. A call to recognize in Jesus the reflection of God. A call to grasp that reflection and make it part of our own lives. And as we put Christmas in that proper place in our minds, we can also recognize that our life of faith is both an infinite journey and a journey focused on a specific endpoint. It's an infinite journey because it's ever developing, ever changing, with ups and downs like any relationship. Sometimes our faith might be strong. Sometimes we might struggle. Sometimes we might feel like we know just what to do. Other times we might feel completely lost. Sometimes we might feel close to God. Presence by us, within us. Sometimes we might feel totally alone. And all of that is completely normal. The story of Christmas represents only the beginning of that infinite journey. But our life of faith is also focused on an end point. It's focused on reaching the goal of loving like Jesus called on us to love. It's focused on ultimately being with our God, God our mother, our creator, carer, provider, who at Christmas time, all those years ago, reached out to us with human hands. May our faith develop and grow in us. May we reach back and hold the hand that was stretched out to us through Jesus. And may we never let go. Amen.